Good evening, everyone. Just getting things set up here, and then we'll jump in. Make sure to let me know if the audio's coming through all right, and if everything's sounding okay. All right. Well, hopefully, hopefully you can hear all right. Let me know. Let me know in the chat if the audio's good. Audio's fine. Great. Thanks for letting me know. Appreciate that. All right. So tonight I wanted to work on I wanted to work on a project. It's actually based on a project that I did almost a year ago, and it was based off of. Here, let me show you what it was based off of. All right, so if I can get this over on my screen, so there's this Chinese cultural center in Belgrade, Serbia, and and I was asked quite a while ago, like, hey, how can we do something like this with geometry nodes? And this was this was probably, I don't know, when we were still in 2.79 maybe, and before fields for sure. And so now that we have fields, the method that we can use to do this is changed a bit. And so I thought, why don't I give this another shot? And but instead of doing a polished video, I thought, hey, why don't we do a live stream and see where that gets us. So the main idea here is that we're going to have a box, and then we're going to have another box on the outside of that that's going to have these cutouts. So, nothing too uh, nothing too crazy. Um, but let's jump in and see what we can do just using geometry nodes, rather than having to build a bunch of extra shapes. Now, some of these shapes, obviously, we would have to model. If we wanted specifically, if you notice the shapes in the windows actually create like a mountain range, we're going to use a texture, just a random texture to generate this, um, rather than an image. But of course, I imagine you could use an image instead if you really wanted to. So let's see what we can do. So over here in in geometry nodes, give me just a moment. Still kind of putting my stuff together. All right. The first thing we want to do is kind of build the base of our building that we're going to do. Um, so I'll go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this, and I'll add our node tree. So like I said, we don't want to model this off of a cube, um, that we have like in edit mode. So we'll go ahead and do it all in geometry nodes. Now, I would recommend, um, if you're doing a larger project like this, go ahead and use a combination of modeling and geometry nodes. Use geometry nodes just for the windows or something like that, rather than like forcing yourself to do everything in geometry nodes, because I think a lot of people will kind of drive themselves crazy trying to do every last little thing in geometry nodes. You really don't need to do that. Um, So just keep that in mind. But for this one, yeah, we'll see what we can accomplish. So the building itself, we'll start with a cube. Hook that up, and let's go ahead and give it some size. So I'm going to use a transform node. Well, actually, no. We'll just do it this way. Stretch it out this way. Maybe, I don't know, 20 meters. Give it some depth. And give it some height. It really doesn't matter how big we make it. We'll see what we can do here. So this is going to be the primary, like if we look back at the image, you'll see there's this, like, the glass on the inside, and then there's the shell on the outside. So this will be our glass on the inside, and now let's make the facade on the front. Now, we don't yet have a solidify modifier or a solidify node in geometry nodes. So we could, like I said, we could go ahead and we could add another cube to this, and then add a solidify modifier, and then do some other stuff. But we're gonna maybe attack this in a little different way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add I'm gonna duplicate this cube. I'm gonna go into top view, and I'm gonna connect these up. Here, hold on a second. Maybe you might want to see my input history as well. That might help. Okay. All right, so this one, I'm going to collapse this. Oh, no, that's not what I want. That's what I want. I'm going to collapse this one on the Y, and then I'm going to use a transform node. And then I'm going to translate this forward on the Y and bring it out right to there. I'll give a little bit of a gap there so you can see. So this is what we'll cut out of, and of course you could add it to the sides or whatever. I'm just going to do the front for tonight, just to keep it simple. And so then give it some relative thickness here. That's kind of way too thick, so let's make that a little thinner and bring that close like that. Okay, so now that we've got that, we want to start thinking about how we're going to cut out of this. And before we had fields, before we had a lot of other a lot of other options, we had to bring in stuff from outside of our node tree quite a bit. So now it's a whole lot easier. What I want to do is I want to create a grid to cut out our windows with. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mesh primitives grid. Plug that into my join geometry, and there it is. And I'm going to also transform that. get it out in the front there. I'm going to rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. So now it's that way. And then I can also change my size to match up the front of this. And I'll give it some subdivisions to start with. We'll go yeah, maybe that's too many. Yeah, that looks good for now. All right. So this is going to be our grid that we're going to use to cut things with. Yeah, there we go. Now we want to think about how we want to cut into this. I know in the previous video, I did I brought in a cube and then I instanced the cube on the points of the grid that we brought in, because we also brought in the grid. But now that we have a separate, now that we can actually bring this in with a node, we don't have to worry about that. And what's nice here is this all stays procedural. Whereas before, you always had to go back and edit the original meshes, and then that could get messy, and you lost a lot of control that way. So what I want to do is use this as some points. And I'm going to use my instance on points node, put that there. So that grid has now become my points. Hey, thanks. And yeah, the year's going well so far. Back to work already and all that kind of stuff, but it's yeah, we're actually getting some cold weather, which is nice. It was unseasonably warm, so kind of nice to get some actually winter weather. um, all right, so we want to instance something here, and one of the things we did, well, another one of the nodes that we don't have quite yet is a bevel node. So I could put in some cubes, and if I had a bevel node, I could bevel them. Or I could just use cubes, but then I'd have these squared off windows, and that's what I did on the old video, but I wanted to I don't know what VYN means. I'm sorry. Um, uh, so what I'm going to do instead of using a cube is I'm going to use a curve. So I'm going to add in a curve circle, and I'm going to instance that on my points. Now, that obviously is not what we're looking for. Our circles are lined up, pointing upwards towards the z-axis. So I am going to need to rotate these circles. And so I can just grab this transform node, stick it here. We don't want any translation, but now they're facing the right way. And I'm going to reduce the radius on these. Okay, so now we have at least we have these. So now that we have, good morning. Now that we have these in here and kind of blocked off, now I can adjust my grid to get these more evenly spaced out. So I'm going to go ahead and add some vertices on my y or my x-axis, and that looks more like a grid now. Okay, well, obviously our windows are not circular. Our windows are kind of a rounded. They're a rounded off square. So what I'm going to do is bring bring the resolution of my curve circles down to 4. So now I've got squares. I could have used the quadrilateral node. I guess I wrote it. I could use it. Um, let's do that, because why not? Let's go crazy. Quadrilateral. There we go. Hey, look at that. And of course, you could use this to make any any shaped windows you wanted, for real. So now that we have this, we want to round these corners off. So to do that, we could use the curve fillet node. So if I go up here and go to fillet curve and drop that in, and I'm going to put it on poly, give it a couple of count, and I'm going to reduce this radius down a little bit until I get something decent looking. There, that's not too bad. We could bump it up just a little, just to make it a little more obvious. Now, one thing we don't want to do is bump up the resolution too much, because we're going to use this as a cutout, and that's going to generate a lot of geometry when we go to use this as a boolean. So you gotta look out for that. And actually, we're gonna look at a way we can kind of work with this, so it doesn't drive us crazy. Um, so there's a question in the chat. Hey, is there any other way where we could get more info about a particular node other than the Blender docs? Yeah, I would say if you have questions, there is a great there's a great resource if you've never been well, and of course I say this, but I believe they're having uh, a web issue right now. If I go to, yeah, looks like their certificate expired and they got to fix that. But if you do, once they get this fixed, and I'm sure it'll be fixed first thing tomorrow, um, in Amsterdam time. So I would say in, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, this should be fixed. But if you go to Blender chat or blender.chat, let me just, we'll do this, and you don't skip the HTTPS. I'm doing this only because I know that um, I know that this is an okay deal. That's having trouble right now. Well, anyhow, if you go to blender.chat, once the server's back up, there is there's a channel called Everything Nodes. There's one called Geometry Nodes, and that one's a developer channel. So if you go there and you start asking just usage questions, you'll probably get directed to the Everything Nodes channel. And that is a place where a bunch of people will hang out throughout the day and just talk about like using geometry nodes. People are generally very friendly about answering questions, and in real time. Uh, I think people get a kick out of being able to help people. So for sure, check out blender.chat as soon as they get the server back up and running. Like I said, I would imagine within the next 6 to 8 hours, that's probably going to be back online. Yeah, it's just a certificate error they've got going on right now. Um, so yeah, I would do that. So we've got this grid of our rounded rounded squares, and it's placed in the middle of this front facade of our building. We're not going to be able to use this as a cutout because these don't have any thickness yet. So how do we give a curve thickness? The easiest way to do that is to make it use the curve to mesh node. So if I come in here and do curve to mesh, and I drop that here, you might be tempted to use like to use like a curve line to give this thickness. But if you drop a curve line onto the profile curve, it's not going to give you what you want. What you want to do is the opposite. You want to use this. You want to use this as the profile, and this as the profile curve, and then use a line as our curve. So if I come in here and I say curve primitive curve line, and I drop that on there, now all of a sudden I've got some little tubes here that I can work with. Now as well, we're going to click this fill caps so that these are now solid. So that's looking pretty good. You will notice that these aren't going all the way through. So I'm going to adjust the start and end of my curve line to get these lined up where I want them. So if I kind of grab this one, bring it back, grab this and bring it that way. So now my curve line goes from here to here, and it's got that window shape as the bevel. Yeah, that is a super good way to do extrusion. And you know, there's you should be able to do oh, let's see here, curve well, let's do this one. Yeah, I'm going off on a tangent here, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. Anyhow, yes, using the curve line and a shape as your profile is a great way to do extrusion, to extrude shapes. And of course, you can change out your shape for really anything you want here. Or if you have an external curve and you want to bring that in, you can do that too. All right, so now that we have this, so we've got our cutter here. We've got what we want to cut, and then we've got this thing behind it. So if we look at our I've heard of the Noodler add-on. I have not tried it out yet though. I need to do that. I've been really focused lately on building some nodes, building some new nodes. I've actually got one that I just released I just committed the accumulate node not too long ago, and then the edge angle node just was it yesterday or the day before? I can't even remember what day it is. It was yesterday morning. I got that committed, and I'm working on one right now called duplicate geometry that I think is going to be pretty interesting. It's got a ways to go still. It's a lot of code. I think the source file is like 700 lines long at this point, but whatever. But I'm excited about that one. I think it's going to be real helpful, especially with things like accumulate field. So I don't get to play with other add-ons as much as I might like to. So here we've got this cube here was our main one behind here. Oop. Then this one is our facade that we're going to cut. So what we want to do is we're going to grab this, move it out. I'm going to take my this node, this line, which is my which are my objects here. I'm going to add a mesh boolean. And then I'm going to put my cube, my facade, into here. Okay, so already we're getting something decent, and that's looking pretty cool. Now the problem you might find though is if I go and I change these settings here, let's okay, we got our grid. Say I change the number of my grid. You'll see that takes a it takes a long second to update. That's because every time I'm changing the grid size, it's having to recalculate the mesh boolean. And this node, if I actually, if you haven't seen this, this is real handy, especially if you're finding a node tree that you're doing is running slowly, and you're not quite sure why. You can come in up here to the overlays in your geometry node editor and turn on timings. And this will show you how long each node is taking to run. So these like less than a tenth of a millisecond, so pretty fast. And then you run over here to mesh boolean, and you've got 1148 milliseconds. So that's 1.148 seconds. That's pretty long. So you're not going to be able to really do this in real time. So one thing that I noticed that made this a little better as I was kind of tweaking this, kind of playing with this before I did the stream, was if instead of using a mesh boolean here, I used a join geometry and I added this in. Okay, so I've got, now instead of cutouts, they're just pegs, and I'm not unioning them with the with this facade. They're just intersecting it. They just happen to be in the same space. But you'll notice that this join geometry takes less than a tenth of a millisecond. So if I change the grid size here, you'll see that I get like real-time responsiveness on changing that up. So that's pretty handy. If you can live without seeing the cutouts, but just seeing where the pegs are, so that you can tweak it until you're ready to do that. That's pretty handy. And then to make that a little easier, I'm just going to add a utility switch. I'll plug in both of these. And now if I turn this on, I get my cutouts. If I turn it off, I get my pegs. So it's just a real quick and easy way to toggle that. And if you really wanted to, you could drag this to your input, and then You could turn it on and off from your modifier if you really, really wanted to do that. I don't. That's okay. All right. So now that we've got our basic cutouts here, now we want to start working on making them a little more interesting. First thing we want to do is make them so they bump up against each other a little closer. So I'm just going to make my quadrilaterals just a little bit bigger. Okay. So let's say that's like the maximum size that we want these to be. If we want to scale these individually, we would go ahead and we would scale our instances, because each one of these cubes is an instance of our curve, of our extruded curve. And just to clean things up a little bit, I'm going to grab all of this for our this that builds one of these. I'm going to hit Control G, group those together, drop back out, and this is our window shape. Okay. So now if we change the scale of our window shape, select all of these, you'll see we are changing the scale of all of them. But we do notice that this is a field input on the scale, so we can adjust these individually on our instances. So let's go ahead and do that. Here's another new feature. If you haven't seen this yet in 3.1 alpha, you are going to like it a lot if you've done anything with geometry nodes. And that is the new drag search functionality out of sockets. It's still being worked on. It's still being added. Not every it's gonna get a lot of polishing before Blender 3.1 goes into final, but it's great. So if you click and drag on a socket and you drag out, you'll notice you get a little plus sign now. If you drag over a socket, it goes away and it's just going to connect like normal. But if you release at this point, you get a search window. And here you can start typing in a node name. So here I want to do a combine XYZ. So if I just type in COMB, I get a combine XYZ and I get the socket. What's really cool as well is if you pull out something like, say I pull this out, you'll see here you've got the names of nodes and then you've got the actual sockets. So not only can you create a new node from pulling it out like that, you can connect it to the socket you want immediately rather than creating it and then having to pull it up to that one. So if you wanted this to go to the map range vector socket, you just click here, or you could pick one of the other sockets if you wanted to as well. So super handy. Now, I'm gonna put just one as my current scale for these. That way they're back to the way they were, but now we can adjust these separately. So if I change the X, you'll see that changes in this direction. You'll see Y isn't doing anything. That's because Y is actually changing us in this direction, because you'll remember we rotated them 90 degrees. So that's why the Y is going in an odd direction and not up and down. Well, actually, no, that is the Y. Don't listen to me. That was adjusting in the Y direction. See, green there. And then the Z will be our up and down. Put these all back to 1. So what we want to do is we want to just affect the Z and the X. We want to leave the Y this same depth because we want them to cut all the way through all the time. So I could just add a input value and plug this into the X, Z. And now when I change this, the aspect ratio stays the same. But because we are just plugging a static value into these, they're all getting the same scaling. So instead, let's use a texture. You can go ahead and use whatever texture you like. I'm just going to use a I don't know. We'll use a Voronoi texture. And then I'll plug this into my X and Y. So now I'm getting something a little more interesting. I can scale this up or down. Change the randomness. Hello. If I don't like this one, I can go ahead and pull it out. I could change this to say wave texture. That's interesting. I like that. But you'll see that since we're not affecting the Y, these keep the same extrusion, and that stays important for our cutout. So if I bring this here, come back, turn on my switch, you'll see I'm getting something a little more interesting. Now, one of the things you might notice here is some of these are just too small. Like, say, well, I don't want them below a certain point. So there's a few things we could do. In your instance on points, you do have a selection input. So we can use this value to drive whether or not we're going to instance there. So we could say if the value gets too small, don't instance that window at all. So to do that, we could just use a compare node. So we'll go to utilities compare, and that was another nice update. It was kind of a pain to code, but because there's so many different combinations of these to these, and then if you go to vector, you get all of these, and so there was a lot of options there that had to be coded in. But if I come in here and I say, if I take this factor, so if the random wave texture is greater than 0, that's going to be our result. So if I plug that into selection, nothing changes because all of the values are greater than 0, or, well, yeah. I mean, they might be 0, and in that case, they wouldn't show up anyway. But if I increase this now, now you'll see the smaller ones start to disappear. So now they have to be above 0.2 in order to show up, or above 0.3. So that can give you a little bit more artistic control, so that you're not creating a whole bunch of little tiny pinpoint windows. If you want looped indices on different parts of the mesh, you can use an accumulate field node with an ID separating the parts and with a value set to 1. The trailing output is going to be the index. Oh yeah. The one of the things I'm interested in seeing is what people start doing with the accumulate node, because when I built it, I had a very specific use case in mind, that I was trying to do. I was trying to create, just basically to stack things up, and uh, and I was finding, I couldn't really do it procedurally. You can stack things up if they're evenly, um, if they're even amounts, because like you can use like a mesh line with a certain distance, and then as long as your objects are that same distance, you can stack them. But I wanted varying heights of those stacked things, and unless I very specifically went in and set each single one, um, like, I'm sorry about the tryptophobia. Yeah, yeah, I could see that. Um, uh, so so I built it with that in mind. But what I'm excited to see is that people are starting to use the accumulate node for some other things, and finding little tricks. And of course, as I was building it, um, one of the primary, um, geometry node coders, Jacques, um, he said, well, why don't we, add this kind of like this group index, so that we can do like multiple piles. And so we, added that to it, and so that was a neat, addition, something I really wasn't even planning on originally. Um, and then of course this, duplicate geometry node that I'm now working on. I think that's going to make, once you add that in on top of the accumulate node, you're going to be able to say like, okay, take this grid, and then on all of these points, duplicate those points, any number of times, and those are going to be, each one will be separate in a field. So like on point 1, you could duplicate it 5 times, and in point 2, you could duplicate it 10 times, and in point 3, you could duplicate it no times, and so forth and so on down this field. Then you could use a set position node to set each of those individual duplications, to a different height, or or whatever you're going to do with it. Um, and so you won't need to do a mesh line in order to generate your duplicated geometry. Um, it'll just be it'll just be there, and you'll be able to duplicate, faces or points or edges or splines, or instances. So uh, it's gonna be pretty sweet. Um, so to finish this one off, I would say, oh, we could grab a couple of materials. Let's give us, add a light source here. Get a sun. We don't. That's too much. Yeah. Okay. Good. We'll add another material. Make this one metallic and no roughness. That'll be the glass. And we'll use a set material. And that starts to give us what we're going to do. All right, so that's basically the idea that I had for this one, to recreate that project completely with geometry nodes rather than bringing in a bunch of objects from outside to create the windows and to create the main shapes and all of that. If you needed additional cutouts out of this or additional control, you could, of course, bring in your own grid instead of generating one. And then you could use like weight painting to say like, oh, I want bigger windows here, or I want whatever. You can do that however you like. What I'm gonna do? Give me 2 seconds. Let's save this. Building. Okay, cool. Let's see. I don't know if this is gonna work or not, but we'll give it a try. Make sure this is the right one. Right. Geometry. Ah, cool. All right. So, is the Boolean node going to get any faster in the future? I would imagine that the Boolean node will get faster. There's a lot of work going into speeding up geometry nodes, and unfortunately, just as an operation, Boolean is pretty pokey. But I think if somebody finds a method that works well and works quickly, that could get implemented. I think there's going to be some updates to the mesh structures in the back end that might help with that. But some of that's above my pay grade, as it were. So yeah, I would certainly like the Boolean node to get faster, for certain. So what I want to show you before I finish up for the night here, I'll give you a little preview of the duplicate elements node that is currently in development. So say I have a cube here. Oh, and this will probably crash at some point. So just bear with me if it does. What you're going to be able to do is use this duplicate elements node. And if I put this in face mode with with an amount of 1, you get the original object, which is, really exciting. And I can change this and nothing happens. Well, if I look over here and I look at faces, I've got 6. But if I change this to 2, you'll see now I have 12. So that's good. That means that there's 12 faces here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a set position node. And then I'm going to use the offset, and I'm going to use the normal. All right. So we still only have, I'll put this down to 1 here. So I've got 1 duplication of the original object. And what this is doing is this isn't giving me any of the original object. This is just giving me the duplicated elements. So I've got a duplicate of each face, and now I've pushed them out by the offset. But if I come here and then I say instances, no, utilities, vector math, scale, and then I scale the normal by this copy index, the first duplicate copy index is going to be 0. So it's not going to offset it at all. But if I then say amount 2, I get this. So this is going to be interesting because now I can do I could do all sorts of things with this, because each one of these faces is this is all part of the same mesh, but we're going to but it's still just a mesh. So if I wanted to, I don't know, instance on points, no, distribute points on faces. Do that, or if I come in here and I do subdivide, and then smooth this out, and then I'm going to instance on points and instance maybe an icosphere. That here, radius down a bit. If I increase this amount, and now I'm gonna add a math node here, change it to multiply. And of course, I could do instant input scene time, maybe. This was another fun one to code. I could drop seconds here. That then I don't know. At this point, it's really just you can just start messing around with it, and I don't know. We could do a sine wave. And if I wanted more elements here, I can ramp that up. Really clamp this down. Uh, so that's the faces mode. Yeah, so you've got well, I'm going to let me get rid of some of this stuff here. Um, oh yeah, that's a lot of faces. Yeah, you can control how many each get because you'll notice here that the amount is a field. So if I were to, I'll just do something simple. If I just did the index, dropped it onto here. Now each face is getting just as many instances as its index. Um, so yeah, you know, that's that. And then in addition to that control, um, there's a little bit of redundancy here because you could set the amount to 0 and that would turn it off, or you can change the selection. So I could do something like here, and I could say compare, and then I could say input position, separate X, Y, Z. Z is greater than 0. So now they're still getting, the amount from their index, but only the ones who have the the face center is greater than 0. So that's yeah, that's pretty cool. We can go into edge mode. Edge mode is loose edges don't get shown in um don't get shown, but if we were to take this and do mesh to curve, you'd see the edges out there. And those edges are also duplicated, just the edges, not connected. So that's kind of neat. So there's edge mode. There's point mode. So you can do point type stuff. There is spline mode. So let's come over here. We'll add a Bezier and give it a geometry node tree. Duplicate elements, spline. And we finally get a crash. I knew it would come eventually. Uh, anyhow, um, like I said, it's still under development, but um, super amount of possibilities with it. The one that I see really being interesting is say you have a grid. Oh, let's subdivide this a few times. Then you duplicate elements here, and you got it in points mode. So now you've got a grid of points. Then let's see here. What could we do? If I come in and if I had like a vertex group here, all right, so I'm gonna go geometry, set position. Geometry, set position. Do the same kind of thing we did before. This will be a combine XYZ. We use the copy index. Okay, so now we've got this. Just going to drop a math node on there so I can get these a little closer to one another, and I'll just divide this, get them closer like that. Whoop, not that close. Sure, that's great. So now, I can do this, but here's a fun thing we could do. If I use this input to drive the amount, and I'm going to add a math node and multiply it by 10 because our vertex weight goes from 0 to 1. So I'm going to grab my original and join it up with this one so I can see. All right, so now if I come in to vertex paint mode, weight paint mode, there we go, and I start painting on this, maybe. So you're gonna make me a liar. Why are you making me a liar? Oh, there we go. Okay, so this, and maybe some of this, and a little bit of that. Okay. Now, it's a little hard to see because they're just verts, but if I come in and do a little instancing, instance on points, and then go back to our trusty icospheres. And maybe do a little bit of stretching on. So now I've got my weight paint. Affecting that. And of course, if I didn't want to use my weight paint, I could always just use a texture like all right. Let's check some questions here. Because I'm sure if I play with this long enough, I'm gonna make it crash again. Um, okay. So, what was the node I used instead of number frames to set time? Oh, yeah, yeah. Um, that is the input scene time node. That will give you access to the current second or the current frame. So yeah, that gives you that information there. So, yeah. So yeah, that's fun. Um, and that again, that's under the input scene time. All right. Do we any other questions? Before we wrap up for the evening. Is that better than using number frame? Yes, actually it is. Um, because using number frame edge demo of edge neighbors. Okay, so number frame uses drivers, and drivers can set um, some dependency loops that can be difficult to deal with. So it uses the driver subsystem to get at that information, whereas the scene time node is going directly to the dependency graph, as I understand it. So it's getting the time source directly from the system, the scene time. The other thing that's nice with that is, you know, if this will work if you don't have drivers enabled, because you can set your file to not run drivers. I'm pretty sure. Um, so this will work regardless. And it's just nice. It gives you a clear indication of where that data is coming from, rather than a mysterious purple box. Uh, so yeah, yeah. Um, Demo of edge neighbors. Let me think. So the edge neighbors node. Um, oh yeah, yeah. Okay. I can do a quick demo on that. Let me drop out of my. Oh, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Let me drop out of my development build here for duplicate elements, just so I am not worried about that crashing. Um, so edge neighbors gives you access to some information you didn't previously have. So if I create a mesh here, and we'll just subdivide this. Okay. Um, so this gives you how many faces are um, on this edge or can contain this edge. So like if I look at this one, um, if I look at this edge, the face count of this edge is going to be 2. Okay. Um, if I look at this one, the face edge is going to be 1. If I were to take this one and extrude it, that one's going to be 3. So if I do a Control Shift click on Edge Neighbors, and then a Control Shift click on Group Input, now I've got a viewer node of the face count and working with the input geometry. And if I come up here, to Edge, all right. So um, yeah, so we've got these, um, we've got all these edges. And if I turn on my indices, okay, cool. So if I look at edge number 25 in my list here, you'll see it's got a face count of 3. If I look at edge 0, it's got a face count of 1. And like 30 here has a face count of 2. What's pretty interesting now with that is I can use this as a selection. So I could do something like, oh, and if I look at um, yeah, okay. So if I go here and I do a utility compare integer, and I were to say edges where the face count is 1, and then I were to do something with that, like we'll just do set position just for sake of ease here, and then I were to plug this into here. If I change the offset, So now I'm only moving the edges or the points that have face count greater than 1. And because this is interpolating from the edge domain to the point domain, it's going to do its best to keep that outside selection or that outside data the same as it would be. So if I only wanted to move my outside ones, I could change this and say where the face count is equal to 1. So this is a great way. So the edge neighbors node is a great way to get like a border selection on a mesh island. If you are also looking for if you're looking for non-manifold, and two of the definitions for non-manifold is well, so not equal to 2. So the edges this is going to select yeah, so this is gonna be able to select ones you know that meet those criteria. Um, and again, this is gonna be actually I shouldn't have closed out my duplicate elements, because you could then use that and you could just duplicate the just duplicate the outer edges of your of a mesh. Um, so yeah, that's one use for edge neighbors. Um, the handy node for making a solidify node. Yeah, and I don't know if it's going to be in for 3.1. There's a lot of work and not as many hands in the geometry nodes coders as there could be. But I'd really like to see a solidify node soon. I know that I know that Hans Gaudi is working on a an extrude node right now. Hopefully, that will be done in the not too distant future. I know that one has been much wanted and needed for a while. So another question here. I guess the question is: do edge neighbor and duplicate elements and accumulate all work together? Yeah, I mean, see, that is the beauty with these nodes. You can plug them in however you like. Oh yeah, Hans is Hans is definitely a coding beast. He's kind of he's been kind of my code my go-to guy for reviewing my code and really helping me when I get stuck. Uh, yeah, there's a daily build. Yes, yeah, there's probably a patch build available for the extrude node, but again, it's in rapid development, so be aware that if you're working out of a non-master branch, that those can change at any time. Whereas the stuff that goes into master is generally a lot is tries to be as polished and finished as possible and not get changed willy nilly. Um, but back to the question about using the edge neighbor and duplicate elements and accumulate. So I could see you using edge neighbor to find a selection of the outer edges then using duplicate elements to make several copies of those, and then using the accumulate node to stack them up. You know, that would be a legit um, that would be a legit deal. Uh, how do you code for Blender geometry nodes? Are there any good resources online? So yeah, beauty with Blender is it's open source. There, if you go to, let's see, if you do a Google search for build Blender and then whatever platform you're on, like say Windows, um, you will get building Blender for Windows here. And this will give you a list of instructions on how to get your system set up so that you can compile Blender on your own computer. Um, all the tools that you need for it are freely available. You don't have to pay anything to get the tools that you need to build it. You download the source code, and you can update that as often as you like once you've downloaded it. And the beauty is the first download is pretty big, but then um, any additional times that you update it, you're just getting the changes, and then you compile, and then that's that's how you can get going. So you check there. Coding geometry nodes. Geometry nodes are coded mostly in C++. There's a little bit of C, but the amount of C in Blender is slowly getting smaller and pushing more and more towards all C++ in the back end. There's some Python, obviously, because we do a lot with Python and the connection there. But that is the language that you would need to code in if you are interested in actually coding built-in geometry nodes. Then, if you kind of get beyond that, then you can go to developer.blender.org. And developer.blender.org actually is where you can find the code that's going into Blender. This is where patches are. This is where people are submitting new things, and uh, where you can actually see where you could go in and see, like, you could find and search for maybe a feature. So like here, this was the original design um, document for the duplicate geometry, which is becoming duplicate elements. And then if I scroll down here, you'll find the code changes for that particular um, patch. And so you'd be able to go in and developers can make comments on each other's code, and and start to work that together in order to in order to get there. So yeah, check it out. Um, what are the work in process geonodes that you know of? Uh, oh, so if you're interested in let's see here. Give me 2 seconds. Um, I'll drop a link in the in the chat. This is the current work board, and this is where we've got community tasks. You know, these are things that are kind of out there. Like, hey, if somebody wants to work on these, you know, give it a shot. Some of these are being worked on by certain people. Some of them are still kind of open. Like this one here is actually, I'm working on this one, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to claim this task. So now, this one is marked as something I'm working on. Yeah, so you can check there. And one of the items here is the Geometry Nodes 3.1 targets. And this link, I'll post this one. This is the list of the targets for Blender 3.1. And what things have been postponed beyond 3.1. So you can go check that out as well and get an idea of what's going on. All right. So it's getting late here. It's about 12:30 here in Illinois, and so I probably ought to be getting off to bed soon. So thanks everyone who came out, watched the stream tonight. It was nice to have a bunch of you hang out and ask some questions, and hopefully learn a few things, get some ideas, and I'm sure that that each and every one of you are going to come up with something even more awesome than I was doing here to do. If you use anything that you learn from me, please, you know, if you post it on social media, if you post it to Twitter, post it, tag me at Johnny Gizmo. That's at JOHNNYGIZMO on the Twitter. So you can tag me there. I'd love to see what you're working on. It makes me really happy when people either use the tools I've built to build cool stuff, or an idea that they got from me. Because generally speaking, they'll get an idea from me and they would take it, you know, 20 times further than I ever did, and that just makes me happy. So anyhow, so yeah, I will. I'll be on again. I'm not sure how soon I'll do another stream. Generally speaking, around here, I can only get on pretty late. That's when I have a little more reliable internet for a stream. Yeah, this will be posted. I'll leave this posted on the channel, so you can watch this again if you like. And I'm gonna stop stammering, and I'm gonna sign off. So thanks again for coming out, everybody. I'll catch you next time.